Jim, howdy, partner. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing okay. I must admit, though, every day seems a little more surreal than the previous. And as I watch the news and see crazy things going on, I think that the world is getting crazier every day. Any nation that even considers a person like Hillary Clinton for president is way, way crazy. So we're dealing with that, a career criminal and, part of a murder enterprise is running for president and falsifying the presidential polls to make sure that there's some baseline of support, smearing some of the other candidates. And it's just incredible what's going on, but, that's politics. But apart from that, we've got a lot of strange things going on, and I think we're seeing an acceleration of the dollar rejection. So strange times, Will.
Strange days indeed. We always love having you on, Jim, because of your coverage of the geopolitical dismantling of the dollar. And your data and your sources are stellar. And anyway, I wanted to start with a question that a lot of people have on their mind. How bad is this going to get? Do you see a zombie apocalypse? Am I going to be running from neighbors trying to eat my arm off? Not to try to be silly, but how bad is this thing going to get?
Well, I think it's going to get a good deal worse before we start to see the ultimate solution coming in. And, I've been asked a lot of times, well, what is the solution? We've tried everything. I said, no, we haven't. We haven't done the gold standard. We haven't liquidated the big banks. Those are the two big steps. We have not liquidated the insolvent, gigantic banks that are corrupt, that are controlling markets, that are doing narco money laundering. We haven't liquidated them. We've given them this too big to fail blessing and redeemed all their toxic bonds with free money. We haven't tried everything. We've done everything but the solution. And there's a saying in Europe that the Americans will eventually do the right thing after they try all the wrong things.
Right, I've heard that.
That's a joke in Europe about Americans.
Right.
But we got a couple things that are really critical. One is that there's a tremendous dependence on narcotics money for the U.S. and Western banks, in particular London and New York. And curiously, it's not a complete cutoff. It's a gradual strangulation of the narcotics money. And I'm hearing that it is one important factor for the stock market going down in the United States and Western countries. There's less narcotics money available to invest, through the laundering, make it legitimate, get it into this fund, that fund, and before you know it, it finds its way invested in the stock market. Well, it's being denied. So you've got a great dependence of the current system in narco money. And there are some entire country banking systems that are taking a cut off their narcotics trafficking and supporting their currencies that way. So it's going to get a lot worse. To me, it's like, well, you've got these 20 leaders, men and women, standing on a big stage. It's a geopolitical stage that we call. And the stage is falling. Well, when are you going to start to see 5 or 6 world leaders say we need a proper support beam for this platform because this floating system just isn't working? When are we going to start to see 5 leaders step forward and say we need a better foundation? The platform is tilting. The platform has already dropped off a couple of leaders. They're over there. They're swimming in the bushes. No reference intended to the Bush crime family. And what is this better support beam mechanism for the platform but the gold standard? So we need to liquidate the big banks. We need to bring in the gold standard. And I think what's going to happen real soon is some big companies are going to go down and take with them a couple of big banks in the West. I'm not talking about Chinese banks. Most of the reports that you see about Chinese difficulties are to avoid emphasis and attention on the U.S. and Western difficulties. And I have a standard response that I give a lot of people. They give me this nonsense about, well, China is going to completely fall apart. It's going to have a hard landing. And I say, yeah, in the U.S., 5 times worse. Give me a list of your problems in China, and I'm sure every single one of them is 5 times worse in the United States, England, and Western Europe. And there's no response from the clown on the other side. They have blinders on the U.S. problems, and they like to focus on the Chinese. So we need to bring in the gold standard. We need to liquidate the banks. The energy crisis is going to harm the banks, and I think the emerging market nations combined with the BRICS, with some of their alliance nations, the BRICS alliance, so the BRICS and some emerging market nations are just going to come forward and say, we're not doing dollar trade anymore. We're not going to send a ship to Los Angeles and accept treasury bills anymore. And that is part, not all, that is part of what's going on with the shipping crisis, which some are calling a shipping strike. So we're getting very close to the 2 important steps for an improvement and true remedy to the system, and that is liquidation of the big banks and installation of the gold standard. And I think we're going to see something like gold trade notes to replace the treasury bills. So I don't know how far it's going to go, but I know that it's going to go farther.
So you envision everything taking a haircut, everything dollar denominated, I should say, taking a haircut, a life insurance policy, an annuity, potentially even real estate. Just massive devaluations.
Well, that really addresses the issue of the new dollar. I don't think there's going to be any of what you describe until there's the new Scheich dollar. When global trade refuses the treasury bill, you're going to see a magnificent storm hit the United States. It's going to be all sides. It's not just going to be reduced supply to Walmart, all the retail chains, all the hardware stores. No, it's going to be much more than that. It's going to be huge deficits that can't be funded. It's going to be a lot of things happening at once. So the U.S. is going to be in a very tight spot, and they're going to have to say, the government in Washington and their Wall Street controllers are going to have to conclude the time has come for the new dollar. The new dollar will be domestic only, and we're going to be able to devalue it in order to guarantee import supply. That's an enormous step in this process, and it's coming. When it does come, then yes, you're going to see a lot of devaluation for dollar-based paper assets like annuities, the value of maybe a building even. I have a hard time. I think everything in the United States is going to take a hit, whether it's a tangible asset or not. I just think that the paper assets are going to take a worse hit because they're just going to drop like a freaking stone. Look what's happening with the stock market. I just had a little review with one of my clients and one of my colleagues, and we're looking at the S&P 500 index. And you look back in 2000 and I think it's 2015 in September and August, there were 2 touch points. I think it was 1870 or maybe it was 1780. I can't remember exactly. There were 2 touch points for a critical support level on the S&P 500. And that's where we are now. and I think there was a bit of a bounce off that same level now. I think we're going to crack below that. And when we do, I think it's going to start a much bigger panic. Not a giant panic, but a bigger panic. I might even get a call from my sister. The last time I got a call from my sister was the panic in early 2009. And she's proceeded to tell me for 6 years now that everything got fixed. And I said, if everything got fixed, how come we went to 0% with QE? And she said, well, I don't really understand those things. And I said, then how can you claim that everything got fixed?
Right.
She said, well, you know, that's what I believe. And I said, okay, well, you're entitled to believe something based on no foundation. There's no law against that, but don't expect your life savings to survive well.
Oh, and your entire way of life at that.
Oh, it's 7 figures, Will.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are running around saying, well, and they've been doing this for 3 years, well, the stock market's doing well, why should I adapt?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, well, why don't you sell out of what they're propping up, namely your mutual funds and pension funds, 401k, IRA, all that work, your life savings, why don't you sell a good portion of it? Oh, my sister actually did something that I don't know if it's comical. She said she has a new financial advisor who's really sharp and, you know, doesn't ask my opinion on anything, because I'm the idiot middle brother. Okay? Well, you know, the problem, Will, and it's going to sound a little weird, the problem with family is she can point to when I had some real problems in the late 1980s,
mm-hmm.
and doesn't care that I learned from them.
Mm-hmm.
And she can point to when I was 12 years old and pooped in my pants,
right,
and didn't make it home in time, and I had a mess. And you know, maybe there was some embarrassment at the dinner table over the incident. She can point to all those things and therefore say, well, therefore, Jim, I don't think you know what you're talking about. You know, okay, I'm beyond caring. I mention family because so many people have the same problem.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite is my wife, girlfriend, or fiance doesn't want to invest in gold, prefers to buy a house. You know, the old woman and the nest syndrome.
Oh, yes.
And I say to them, ask your wife or whatever, your fiance, if she can define the difference between legal tender, money, and the dollar. And when you get the blank stare, tell them, sorry, you don't know anything about this. So you don't have a big say in it. And really what comes back is, yeah, but Jim, she has a big say in the bedroom. Yes, exactly. That's the problem. The bedroom should not dictate life savings allocations.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, they have a very big influence.
It's true. Yep, I see it every day. Well, not only at home. I meant.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I meant on the work front, honey. I swear, babe. I meant it. I meant it at the office.
Yeah, I know what you mean now.
So after a Treasury rejection internationally, a new Scheist dollar will be implemented by the banksters and the Western criminals as the the fix, at least short term, and to guarantee import supply, which will be it's going to be amazing to me what people are going to allow to happen to them, or their retirement, or their whatever, in the face of disaster, in the face of a collapsing stock market, and international rejection of the dollar. Can you imagine what people like your sister and our families? I mean, imagine what they're. It terrifies me. It terrifies me. People are ushering the crazy.
You're assuming that they're going to get it. You're assuming that they're going to comprehend.
Well,
I don't assume they're going to comprehend. I think they're going to accept lies.
Right. Of course, they'll panic. And accept.
I think my sister is going to be forced into special U.S. Treasury bonds.
Yes.
And therefore say it's all fine, Jim. I'm perfectly safe. Mm-hmm. And when I say, well, when they devalue the dollar, how safe do you think your life savings will be with those 7 figures? Well, you suddenly find that it's only 6. Mm-hmm. And she's going to tell me, no, the government has assured me that there are no more devaluations. They're not going to get it, even when it's happening. Right. And then they're going to say, well, damn those stinking Chinese and Russians. Mm-hmm. And now they're going to be buying up like carpetbaggers American industries. And I say, yeah, it's because we've been making a generation of wrong decisions economically and business, starting with outsourcing of industry. Sis, do you think anything has been wrong with exporting our industry for 40 years or 30 years? I point to 1984, and I remember the day it happened, Will. I was sitting at Digital Equipment Corporation in the Maynard Mill, looking out of my 5th-story window at my office, and a couple guys came into my office and said, Jim, did you hear Intel is outsourcing to the Pacific Rim their California clean room labs? And I said, oh, no. And you read in the press that it's a low-cost solution. It's good for the economy. It'll reduce the cost for all the economy and be a major stimulus. It was. It brought a stimulus in the stock market, which resulted in Black Monday of '87. Yeah, that was quite a stimulus.
Corporate profits, baby.
There's a direct link between the outsourcing and Black Monday of '87. The outsourcing began in '84, and I've come to learn that it was a Rockefeller Foundation concept.
Why does that not surprise me?
Lots and lots of sabotage and destruction comes from the Rockefeller Foundation, and now they've been a little bit kicked to the curb as they sold out of 80% of their fossil fuel investment assets. Mm-hmm. That is what happened in 2014 and 15. I've heard that from a couple of different sources, including The Voice, who I regard as impeccable.
Well, it looks like their timing was pretty good on that, wasn't it?
Well, it's really a function of being told by other
of course
big global players that you're out.
Yeah.
You're out. And there was a major incident regarding Volkswagen. Mm-hmm. All this emissions violations with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, they were fined $18 billion for supposed emission violations in the testing, mm-hmm. whereas General Motors was fined less than $1 billion for 170 deaths.
Yeah, this VW thing is really a mess, and it hits close to home for me because I drive one. I drive a TDI, and that is the engine in question, where apparently they being Volkswagen, installed a device to, basically the computer in the car knew when the emissions testing was being done, and they installed a device to, make everything pass. And it's a disaster, especially when you live in a state like California, where there's a smog test every so often here. So soon my car is going to be rendered useless in this state. So it's a total mess, and nobody, even from the attorneys to nobody knows really what the heck's going on with it either.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on with it. Volkswagen apparently has a little switch in their engine to adapt to the European standard or the American standard. Uh-huh. And the U.S. intentionally confused the two during their tests that they called falsified.
Get out of town.
Furthermore, Volkswagen has been targeted for whatever nasty game can be played against them because they have a 200-mile-per-gallon new carburetor mm-hmm. that is a combination of a steam engine and a gasoline combustion engine. The engine takes the excess heat, warms up the water, brings it up toward, but not equal, toward, like say 95 degrees centigrade, maybe close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I like to think in terms of centigrade because the U.S. measuring system is so screwed up. So it takes it close to the 100 degrees centigrade mark and injects very hot water and explodes it into steam in the carburetor with the gasoline, and they get over 200 miles per gallon, and the Rockefeller family did not like that.
You also have said that they blew up a bunch of their vehicles in China.
Yeah, the Tianjin explosion, and regardless of what the explosion was or what that source was, there's debate about that. Just take a look. What was the victim? Mm-hmm. It was 3,000 units of Volkswagen. Volkswagen is a major player in China, and so is General Motors. So now you got a little more edge to General Motors. This fascist business model, Will, it started to tilt against the foreign corporations competing against the American corporations. I noticed this first with Toyota. Mm-hmm. You've got some faulty starters, okay. And when did that happen? Well, right after the United States government took a significant stake in General Motors. Uh-huh. So this is we play rotten as part of this fascist business model that came into full force after 9/11. So anyway, the big focus nowadays is on the dollar and some of the impact around the world. I'm starting to even hear lately that economists and business leaders inside the United States are saying that the high valuation of the dollar is really hurting their businesses. So this is
what types of, I would ask what types of businesses they would be. I mean, are they
all kinds of industry, exporting industries, mm-hmm. machine tools, whatever. Mm-hmm. The U.S. dollar just going up so much in its exchange rate. I always like to say to people, okay, you claim the dollar is strong, but it's really just strong against crappy currencies, isn't it?
It's the least dirtiest piece of toilet paper.
You could say that it's toilet paper that doesn't have yet the brown stains on it.
Yep.
Okay, so I love the phrase. We were talking about this before we started recording. The Forex market is really a reverse beauty contest. Which one looks the least ugly? And lately the dollar is looking the least ugly, but there's more going on with the dollar, Will. Bill Holter of, is it Franklin Mint? I think it is. Miles Franklin. Bill Holter came out with a really good analysis. He's coming out with a sequence of really good analyses. But he said what we're seeing now across the world is a dollar margin call. And anytime I hear margin call, I like to put it in terms of a stock. Suppose there's a lot of shorted IBM stock, and suddenly IBM announces some good news. And then there's a rush to cover those shorted shares, and there's not enough of them out there. So it disturbs that little micro equilibrium, and suddenly the IBM stock takes off and it's up 20%. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what's going on right now with the dollar. We got the petrodollar machinery is really being dismantled. And those are giant, like just think of a $1 trillion contract that links the dollar with crude oil. Okay, if they're being dismantled, then they need dollars in France to redeem them. So the French banks are saying, well, we need more dollars, There's a dollar shortage across the world, and it's not because of what the idiot who's running the Treasury Department named Jack Lew has to say. It's not because the U.S. economy is strong. It's because the contracts are written in dollars. The margin call is in the dollar. So the dollar is rising, and then you start seeing what I call the feedback loops. And what I found really amazing in the last 10 years, I've been at this newsletter now. It's going to be 12 years in April. So it's only 3 months away from 12 years. I remember first talking about hitting my 10-year anniversary. I've noticed that in these 10 years, there's not a single economist that I can point to who ever mentions a vicious feedback loop. Okay, so the dollar goes up a little bit, and the Brazilian companies start to feel some pain, and a bunch of industries there and their treasury managers, in addition to a bunch of individual wealthy people, start moving out of the Brazilian real and buying dollars. There's your feedback loop.
Right.
Why is it that American economists don't have any concept of either a feedback loop or the carry trade? It's because they're paid to be dumb. They're paid to be loyal, but dumb. And that's why they have a correct forecast rate of around 20 to 30%. Well, they're not paid to be right. They're paid to be loyal.
Yeah, they're paid to ignore certain laws of physics and economics, like in this case.
Yeah.
Right?
They're paid to ignore what's in front of their freaking nose because it's bad for their bank.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's like Keynesian economics, kind of.
I actually had a conversation with my 82-year-old landlady, who's somewhat bilingual, but I had to speak in Spanish because her English was nowhere near as good as my Spanish. And I said to her, the dollar's in trouble, and I tried to make the argument that so many other currencies are in trouble, so many other countries are in trouble. And it was really interesting to hear her arguments, which were very childlike and similar to what you'd hear in a Wall Street forum. The dollar is strong. It'll always be strong. Mm-hmm. The dollar won't go away. It's the fixture. It's the foundation. And I said, well, things change. I call her Senora. Mm-hmm. And things change. And I said that. And then one thing that she actually agreed on, I said, a lot of countries are using narcotics money to keep their banks strong and keep their currencies propped up. And she said, oh, that is true. That is true. Across Latin America, that is true. Mm-hmm. So, she wasn't, slow. But anyway, I have a theory I'd like to share with you, Will, a theory about the dollar, because its exchange rate is going up, which should not be construed as strength. You want to hear my theory?
Please.
Okay. In 1971, we broke off the gold standard. It didn't take long. 2 years later, Kissinger, as a Rockefeller shuttle agent, went to the Saudis and proposed to them. It was not an Arab-inspired embargo. It was a Rockefeller idea that the Saudis liked. And if you want to ever understand the complications of the Saudi and the Middle East situation, for 20 years, the Saudis have hired Israelis as their security agencies. Okay? That's how crazy it is. But in 2 years after breaking off the gold standard, we were pretty much on the oil standard. And you couldn't say that, well, starting in 73, you could take a bunch of dollars and redeem them for ships or barrels of oil. That's not how the standard worked. The standard worked in terms of the biggest producers of oil required payment in dollars. And they took the dollars and kept them in dollars. That was the standard. It's called the Petro Surplus Recycle. So the biggest owners of the U.S. Treasury bond debt are the Arab Gulf Emirates. And right now it's a very big and well-kept secret. How much in Treasury bonds do the Saudis own? And you're hearing things like, well, I think it's $2 trillion. No, the Exchange Stabilization Fund is hanging on to data, and it's suspected it's more like $5 or $6 trillion. And in the same theme, we're hearing things like, well, we could possibly seek a regime change in Saudi Arabia and steal their $5 trillion.
Oh my God.
Like what we did in Libya.
Yeah, Gaddafi.
We killed him and stole 143 tons of gold and a pretty sizable amount of silver, too.
Wasn't this
okay,
guy,
so what's my point? The point is that in 73 we were on a oil standard for the dollar. Not for redeemability, but for a platform in maintaining sales and savings based on the based on the oil industry. It was a dollar platform that the oil industry stayed on and did not veer from with their surplus of petrodollars that stayed in treasuries. They also bought a bunch of Wall Street preferred stock like Prince Al-Walid buying Citigroup, a lot of Citigroup stock. But it's a drop in the bucket when you compare it to, say, $2, $3, or even $5 trillion. So now, if the dollar is so strong, why is its basis dropping by 80%? The oil price. To me, it's evidence of the dying dollar. And when the oil price goes down because of the petrodollar machinery, you're seeing the dollar go up relative to the other currencies. You know, when people tell me, Jim, you don't understand, the dollar's going up. It's not going to die. It's still going up. I say, well, you don't understand what I'm trying to say. It's going up relative to crappy currencies, and it's going up partly because there's a margin call, as Holter likes to describe. So it's really going up like a balloon or set of balloons tied together. When it gets high enough, it's going to break. They're going to pop. And this is something that most of the critics who send me hate mail and other negative email that's really not so much hate-oriented, they just don't understand. What is the dollar index? It's relative value to the other currencies. It's not relative to, say, a building. It's not relative to, say, a farmland. Okay, that's not what the exchange rate is all about. So my argument is the dollar's dying, and you can see it in the oil price. And as the dollar goes up in like this reflex action, oil goes down, dollar goes up. Well, then gold goes down from the same mechanism that lifted the dollar up relative to oil. So the two-step sequence keeps the gold price in paper form down.
Right.
And it's all breaking. It's all breaking, and it's going to be magnificent for the gold investors to watch.
Well,
it's going to lead to economic chaos, Will. Economic chaos.
It's one of those things I've been looking at for years and pondering, okay, how are the precious metals industries, how are they allowing this? I mean, how is silver, how is gold still being pulled out of the ground at these price points, at these levels?
Well, it's not. It's not profitably. I mean, one of the big problems with the mining companies is they've got a 2-year contract for their suppliers, for equipment rental, contracts for workers, leases of land. They're bound by contracts, so
they have to produce.
They're being forced to continue and produce silver and gold at a loss.
Got it.
And they don't even have the option in many cases. Silver Majestic seems to be an exception. They don't have the option, it seems, to say, no, screw you guys. We're going to sell for 30% higher price to Hong Kong and China.
That's right. I remember First Majestic a couple of years ago. Didn't they withhold like half their inventory or something as operating capital or as something? They would withhold silver inventory from the market.
Right. Well, they were able to because of the way they set up their contracts. And I'm thinking that a number of other mining companies just didn't have the wisdom to set up their contracts in advance that way. So I think we're going to see a lot of disruption. As I told my landlady, the entire world's inventory supply system is dominated by the dollar. And she said, well, in Costa Rica, there's a lot of food that's produced here, and it's not dollar related. I said, yes, and it's going to save our butts. And she said, I hope so. I don't want to see any shortages of food in the supermarket. I said, there's going to be some, but what you're going to see is a shortage of all the stuff that comes from the United States.
Oh, your fine GMO products.
Well, I'm thinking toothpaste and soap and razor blades. I've yet to find a domestic razor blade. I've yet to find even a Latin American-made razor blade. And I shave. I don't shave every day, but I shave. I got a thick beard. I don't let it grow, but I refuse to shave every day, just like I refuse to wear a tie.
I like that. I despise both of them as well. I haven't shaved. I have a little mini beard, and I just trim it every couple of weeks. I haven't shaved in. I hate it. I hate shaving. Shaving every day is like torture. It's like bumpy and raw, and anyway.
I know plenty of guys who shave every day.
Yeah.
They ask me, why don't you shave every day? How can you not shave every day? What's wrong with you? And I say, I shave every 2 days unless she insists on it.
Okay, next topic.
Now, when you look at the dollar, look at its basis and look what the dollar's compared to. So the dollar has gone up a lot versus Brazil's. Big deal. Is that strength? No, it's not our strength. It's the dollar is killing foreign economies. It's not just that. It's a double barrel. The dollar is killing foreign economies while QE is killing capital worldwide. Mm-hmm. And therefore, my forecast is we're going to see a global depression. And I've had this forecast for quite a while.
Yeah, I was thinking about your forecasts earlier before we got on the line, and just how many it's been a while since I even looked at it, but do you still track those on your site where you've got your...
I haven't updated it. I have not updated it in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And in those 2 years, there are a lot of little things.
Yeah.
A lot of forecasts. Mm-hmm. Like after the Japanese had their 1.2 trillion in savings confiscated for their pension system that went immediately to be devoted to treasury bonds. In other words, U.S. stole the Japanese pensions. Mm-hmm. I forecasted that the unlimited QE would result in a 20% Japanese yen decline, and that was pretty easy. I forecasted the taper talk in late 2013 was all BS and that they would do nothing. I forecasted the Eastern nation. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Explosion in Texas, that was another one.
Yeah, I thought that the Texans, as a result of demanding their gold back from the New York Fed, they would start seeing explosions in their home state. That was pretty easy. I actually indirectly forecasted the Paris terror incident 3 months ago, because in August I said, with all these refugees going into Europe, I'm certain that the powers that be are slipping in a number of terrorists to blow things up in Europe. Mm-hmm. And then came the Paris incident, which I don't care to talk about for the details.
Sure.
I have forecasted that Russia and China would start de-dollarizing their system and expand the platforms that were non-dollar. And we started to see things like their debt rating agencies, the Daegong rating agency. We started seeing the Chinese payment system to compete against SWIFT. And just this week, we saw Russia announce that they're accepting Chinese RMB for all their Chinese oil sales. So, oh my goodness. So we're seeing a lot of different things happen. I've gotten a lot of them right. But, I don't claim to just sit isolated and come up with forecasts. Mm-hmm. I deal with my group of colleagues, and sometimes the forecasts are as a result of discussions with them. Mm-hmm. I would say to someone like you, Raj, well, it sounds like what you're saying is this. And he said, oh, yeah, that's bound to happen. And that's a forecast that I come up with. But the Voice has a forecast that I latched onto, and he made it in 2014. He said, Germany's going to flip east, embrace Russia with trade, and probably walk away from NATO. That's going to require both Turkey and Germany to walk away from all the narcotics that go through the NATO air bases. Mm-hmm. The NATO air bases actually have more movement of narcotics than they do of military weaponry or parts.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All to the streets of U.S. cities.
Yeah, there's a statistic that I like to quote. In the year 2000, 7% of American street heroin came from Afghanistan, and now it's up tenfold to 70%. God. So this is what our government has wrought upon us. You got to protect yourself well. I mean, you say it to all your clients. I say it to all my clients. You know, get rid of your paper assets and buy gold and silver. The voice has been very plain in recent months. He said the plug has been pulled. The reset has begun. It's multi-steps and multiple players. The plug has been pulled. A lot of disclosures are coming. And the only things left standing without much damage to value will be the hard assets led by gold and silver. And you can see a lot of strong prices for, say, Indiana and Iowa farmland. Mm-hmm. I've got one client, and I met him. He's a really nice guy. He's an ex-U.S. military, but it doesn't mean he's a gung-ho type. It just means he spent some time in the military, and now he's a part-time farmer, I think, in Indiana and Iowa. Mm-hmm. And he keeps me in tune of certain things like farm prices per acre, various auctions and things. And you know who I'm talking about, if he's listening.
I think I know who you're talking about. Anyway,
SJK. Anyway, he keeps me in tune, and it's going to be really hard assets, because when this stuff starts hitting the fan in a much bigger volume and velocity, you're going to see the stock market significantly lower. You're going to see a very strange phenomenon take place where the dollar continues to go up, and when it does, it's going to continue to take up the Treasury bond. And you're going to see falling 10-year bond yield. You're starting to see it already. We're going to challenge pretty soon the 1.5% level on the 10-year. And it's going to be a point of a lot of discussion. Euroraj has been telling me that he expects it to go down to 1.0.
Wow.
And he's an ex-London banker who's been right about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I've borrowed several of his forecasts, and he makes me look good. So that's why I mention him as being a really smart cookie. And I always mention him as being, from the India, Turkey, Iran triangle. He's from that area. And he just went to London to ply his trade after going to American graduate schools. He's got a double master's. I won't say what it's in, but one of them is in finance. And he's a great guy. He's a smart guy. And he alerted me to something a month ago on the Treasury bond, the TNX, the 10-year yield, and said, take a look at that chart, Jim. Don't look at just 1 or 2 years. Look at more than 3. So I fortunately, stockcharts.com now allows a 5-year chart as a standard tool. So they expanded their database, and it looks like a tilted head and shoulders reverse pattern.
Yikes.
And it looks to me like we're headed to 1%, just like he said. So he made the comment, and then I did my charting tools and brought out my charting skills and said, well, here's what it looks like. Here's what the potential looks like, but it's a little bit skewed because it's tilting upward rather than flat shoulders on the head and shoulders. He said, yes, I agree with your point. I agree with your potential. It looks just like what you say. You're backing my point up. I see 1% as the target. So wouldn't it be interesting if we see the only well-performing asset out there being the Treasury bond? That's why I call it, Will, black hole. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to suck in a lot of capital, and the elite powers that be are not going to mind that, because it's going to be one of their tools for eradicating wealth. Mm-hmm. People are going to hunker into the Treasury bond right before the new dollar comes in to devalue it. Mm-hmm. And then poof, 30% losses. It's going to be very ugly. They need an efficient tool to eradicate wealth. So they've got the bail-in of bank accounts and the Treasury bond black hole. So you're going to see stuff like this. That I think it's 1780. Not sure about that. But there's a support level for the S&P 500. We're going to bounce off then and then fall through it. As we fall through it, the Treasury bond's going to rise and the interest, that bond yield is going to fall. A falling bond yield means that more money's coming into the bond. So money's going to go out of stocks and into bonds, taking down the bond yield. And then when you get a bounce up in the stock market, you're going to see the bond yield leveling off. And then you're going to go down further in the stock market, and you'll see the bond yield continuing down from the movement out of the stocks into bonds. So that's what I foresee coming. A magnificent Treasury bond rally.
What happens?
And we're going to use it for propaganda purposes, Will. We're going to say the whole world trusts the dollar. But it's going to wreck American industry because the dollar is too high relative to the other toilet papers.
Great. So more vote for Hillary insanity is coming, huh?
Oh, I don't know. I'd like to see Hillary tried for treason during the presidential campaign.
That'd be fantastic.
And I'd like to see any of her ex-boyfriends, because I don't think they exist.
They don't.
They're just for show.
So, Jim, what happens when all of that capital we were just talking about, all of that liquidity you were just talking about, what happens when just a 1/5, 1/10, 1/50th of that tries to go into tangible assets like precious metals? I mean, explosive increases in price, no?
Yeah, we're starting to see that now. The best performing asset group since January 1st is gold. Stocks are not doing well. Bonds are. But, you know, when you get down to 1.8% and 2.0% in the Treasury bond, it doesn't increase a lot in value as you go from 2.0 to 1.8. It's still low. You don't get that compounding of the interest. If you went from 20 down to 16, you get a tremendous rise because you have the compounding effect over the 10-year period. But when you have a low interest rate, you don't get the much of the compounding effect over the 10-year duration, maturity, for the bond. So we're starting to see that now. And you're seeing, I mean, SJK tells me that we got a little bit of a bubble happening in the Midwestern farm prices per acre. Okay, all right, well, it's understandable. Money coming out of stocks, going into gold, going into bonds, going into hard assets like farmland. I don't think you're seeing people getting out of the stock market and buying a share, a 1% share of an office building. Because the office buildings right now, they're harder to buy. They're a bigger price tag, harder to divvy up the shares. And furthermore, they're having rent problems because their tenants are struggling. So, you know, everything is interrelated, Will, and I tell clients, don't try to short the banks. You don't know which ones are going to be favored. You don't know which ones are going to get continued narco funding. Just buy a lot of silver bars and coins. Get those big 1,000-kilogram. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Get those big kilogram bars. Those 1,000-ounce. That's it. 1,000-ounce bars.
Yep.
Those are that's 60 pounds. It's a 30 kilo bar. It's a common piece. Oh gosh. So a lot of moving parts now, Will. But I think you're going to see continued panic as money gets out of stocks. And the two big factors now that are having their channels trimmed, not as much volume flow. It's two channels. It's the Fed itself and their Wall Street banks. Those are their clients. Those are their boys. They take care of their boys. Fed and the banks are investing less in U.S. stocks. The Fed is printing less money for the benefit of their banks to buy stocks. And the second one is uglier. There's gradual cutoff, and you can give some credit to Putin. He's cutting off some of the narco channels. Like right now I'm hearing that the Bush-Saudi narcotics channel is almost completely eradicated. And that might be 10% of their $1 trillion a year. So $100 billion is lost. And what is that per month? It's $80 billion a month. That's a lot of money to affect the stock market if that's what they choose, if that's where they choose to put it. It's not chump change. You know, I get some naive people saying, well, if the Bushes really had that much money, you'd see them buying up entire countries. And I said, they are! You just don't know how to notice that they bought Paraguay.
Right.
You don't have any ability to notice that they bought 1/3 of Ecuador. You don't have the ability to notice that they bought the entire Colombian banking system. And if they did, how are you going to know about it? Because you don't have much information. And that's when I tell them, you need to sign up for the hat trick letter.
Not seen on CNN.
No, you don't hear much of anything about narcotics on CNN, but you do with the United Nations. They had 2 different drug I don't know what they call their group, United Nations Drug Task Force or something like that. They did 2 different reports making the same conclusion that in 2009 the U.S. banks would have collapsed without the Bush narcotics money.
Wow. Wow, that's to find that as any sort of a major publication is big news.
Well, it's there in United Nations reports. Look it up. I've reported on it twice for the 2 times that it happened in the last 5 years. I reported on it twice. Now, there are a lot of other things going on right now. There's some Vatican hit squads that are trying to go out and knock off people who are involved in international court proceedings to expose the Vatican's Satanism and child sacrificing. So there's a lot going on.
Into the hit squads, huh?
The Vatican hit squads to kill the court members who are in charge of international court proceedings to expose the Vatican for its Satanism and child murder sacrifices, like a few dozen thousand children.
Oh, God. Disgusting. You know,
yeah.
Well, as these atrocities that are fact, that are reality, many of which you and I have talked about, this one included, as they come to light, as people like our family members become aware of these atrocities, or as this type of...
Well, they're going to deny them all the way to the end.
Yeah.
They're too terrible to absorb.
It's true.
They can't handle it.
It's true. Yeah.
They can't handle it. There's a report coming out now about how Princess Diana of England was murdered by the royal family. She learned too much about what they are.
Yeah.
She was asked to go to attend one particular satanic ritual, and she was aghast.
Yeah.
She was dead in 2 weeks.
Jeez.
She saw too much. I mean, why would they show her that? They must have thought that she would have accepted it and wanted to drink some disemboweled child's blood. Well, she didn't.
Why not?
Well, they told her that it would keep her eternally young. That's what they do. They drink the children. And, let's get off this topic. I'm sorry I brought it up.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Well, and we got off that topic from the interrupted narco traffic, interrupted narco money. We've got central banks are no longer expanding their balance sheets as the debt game unravels. Expand on that a little bit for me, Jim.
When we started QE, it's quantitative easing. It's the Federal Reserve's bond purchase program based on printed money to buy U.S. government debt. It's what Zimbabwe does. When we started that in unsterilized fashion, which means that we didn't drain the banking system of funds when we injected huge funds to buy the treasury bonds. Mm-hmm. When we started that, you started to see a rapid rise in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. They were becoming the buyer of last resort. You did not see a lot of foreign nations like Brazil and Norway and France and Belgium and Azerbaijan and Argentina. They weren't all buying some treasuries. They all kind of stopped. And the Fed started buying those treasuries. So you started seeing rapid rise in the Fed's balance sheet. And the last time I checked, it was between $4.5 and $5 trillion. And way back in the stable times, it was less than $1 trillion. So it expanded four to five-fold. And I always like to argue, well, shouldn't that mean the gold price should be up 4 times as much? Well, if it were a real market, yes, exactly. And that's why it's going to go there to 10,000. It belongs there, right, based on the size of the Fed balance sheet. But something has happened, Will, in just the last couple of months. And, it's not surprising to me that the voice said, the reset has begun. He said this in November. He said it's going to have many different pieces to it. I think one of the pieces is that the big central bank franchise system, led by the Fed, they're like the ringleader. But, it's Bank of England and also Bank of France. The semi-renegade in this group is the Bundesbank from Germany. They don't like this gang. They like to do the right thing. But anyway, the central banks, I think, have been told, stop. Stop printing money to buy up these toxic government bonds like the treasuries. So maybe they're starting to unwind their huge balance sheets. Maybe the Fed, as I said, there are 2 sellers in the stock market now, the Fed and the narco guys. Mm-hmm. I think the Fed and the Wall Street banks are selling off some of their stock portfolio. And don't think for a minute that it's going to wreck the big banks, because I guarantee you they talk to each other and they get the wink and the nod and the direct phone call from the Fed, and they put on these magnificent S&P option shorts. Mm-hmm. They put on the leveraged S&P futures and go short, and they put on the S&P option futures and go short, which is leverage squared. Mm-hmm. And they sell their stocks, and you hear stories about the U.S. stock market is down $2 trillion in value, which means that $2 trillion has been taken out of pension funds and put into the Wall Street banks. Yep. Because they have their shorts in place. They're controlling the decline. There are a number of other reset triggers in there, and I think some of them have to do with nations trading outside the dollar. Some of them have nations refusing to ship and accept treasury bills, in other words, dollar payment. Mm-hmm. And now you've got a real big deal that's come up lately, and it's Iran with giant contracts with China. And, we already know that Russia and China are kind of joined at the hip. So when Iran, which has already been a major purchaser of military weapons from Russia, and say centrifuge technology from Russia, what you're starting to see now, Will, is here we have all the central banks winding down, but you're also seeing an emergence of the 3 old empires: the Russian Empire, Chinese Empire, and Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. Persia's been asleep for a while. Mm-hmm. Until 2001, China's been asleep. So I'm reasoning that Persia went to sleep in around 1980. You know, remember the big hostage situation, 1980? Lasted a whole year and a half. Okay, I think they started to go to sleep under the spell of the Ayatollah, but now I think they're starting to awaken in 2016. So a lot of things are happening at once, and most of them have a theme of the dollar no longer being the centerpiece at the table. Mm-hmm. Very interesting times, but, you know, the central banks are not done in their desperation. It begs the question. I got off a little bit on Iran, but the central banks, I think, are winding down. And I like to ask questions, on whose orders? Mm-hmm. Could it be Jacob Rothschild, mm-hmm. who is probably the most influential in the Western French central bank franchise system? Mm-hmm. He's the guy who was the architect of the Ukraine war. He's the guy who ordered the killing of the second Malaysian airline in order to get the Freescale chip, anti-hacking chip ownership. He's the guy who is ordering the Russian airliner to be shot down from Gaza soil. No, he's the guy who's behind the Paris attacks. Mm-hmm. Jacob Rothschild. He's the guy who turned Toulouse, France, into a city loaded with satanic symbols in every street corner. So I reason that it is not Jacob Rothschild who's ordered the central banks to wind down their balance sheets. I reason that it's the white dragons from the east. Mm-hmm. Now, some people giggle. I get some very weird email at times, and a year and a half ago, in 2014, it was a lot stranger than it is now. Mm-hmm. I was getting people, Jim, you sound so silly talking about white dragons. I say, well, you sound pretty ignorant, sir, because you don't know that it is a major society in China. Mm-hmm. 1,000-year-old families, tremendous wealth, perhaps 100,000 tons of gold.
Wow.
And we're only going to be hearing about 20 or 30,000 of it, because the rest is going to stay hidden. Uh-huh. Okay. China has about 30,000 tons of gold. The new sheriff in town started to flex muscles. I got a tip, a phone call from The Voice. I remember it like yesterday. I remember where I was sitting. I remember the apartment I was living in. It was around November of 2011. And The Voice called me up and said, Jim, there's something very big that's just happened. You need to be on top of this and in front of the whole story. I said, okay, I'm all ears. And he said, an influential group in China, he didn't say white dragons, has an enormous amount of gold. And what they've done is they've made available $150 billion for lending purposes. I said, you don't mean cashing in gold. You mean using it as collateral on loans. He said, yes, exactly. And that's been a very big misconception with of a lot of people. They say, well, if all that gold out there, all they do is sell it, and before you know it, we're under 1,000. No, moron. No, moron. No, what they do and what they did in the autumn months of 2011, they put together what they called a war chest, $150 billion. And with that money, they went out, borrowed the money, and demanded the London gold, because they found violations in the Euro Monetary Union foundation setup architecture. They improperly used Chinese gold as collateral in a lot of the Euro currency futures foundation. So they demanded of London 1,000 tons a month. And they got it starting in March of 2012, because that's when The Voice said, we're getting 1,000 tons a month. And I said, who's we, white man? Because he used the word we. And he said, well, I'm part of a group that's demanding, putting their feet to the fire under prosecution on international court in The Hague. That's the pressure. And he said, that's not the only pressure. I said, what other pressure is there? And he said, murder squads.
Yeah.
So they got 1,000 tons a month for over 2 years, Will. They drained London of over 25,000 tons of gold. Who did? The White Dragons did. And the voice started talking about a tremendous shift of wealth from west to east. Mm-hmm. And that's when he tried to tell me that it's not just Chinese, but it's predominantly Chinese. I mean, there might be some really rich Singapore person, sure, a really rich Taiwanese, a really rich Vietnamese, mm-hmm, maybe someone from Cambodia, but I kind of doubt it. Maybe a couple from Thailand. Mm-hmm. I don't know. If there's a group of 50, maybe 45 are from China, right, and 5 are outside. Okay, so I reason now that the new sheriff from the east is the White Dragons, and they're making a lot of important calls. They're trying to clean up the Vatican. I'm hearing that they're going to force this Nazi prince posing as a pope, Francis Bergoglio, the murderer, the guy who's involved with the murders of 20,000 young kids and young people in Argentina in the 70 decade. There's still 2 pending murder trials, murder cases against the Pope in Argentina. Wow. But he's not in Argentina. Okay, I'm hearing that the White Dragons are going to force the Pope to resign after he fulfills a certain role. And it's not really clear what that role will be. It could be to admit the Satanist sacrifices inside the Vatican. It could be that and some kind of revelations of extraterrestrials. I don't know. I don't know.
Heavy stuff.
Very heavy stuff. And here's one of the symptoms from the central banks that's just plain amusing. They've wrecked the economy so much. They've made working capital so valueless, mm-hmm, that money is flooding into the banks and into the treasury bonds. Right. The banks cannot, okay, you would think that money flying into a bank is a good thing. But if a bank cannot make money lending it out, then they lose money paying interest. Mm-hmm. So they don't want a lot of money coming into the bank. So they're trying to discourage it with negative interest rates. I call it breathing through your asshole. It's not a normal thing. I mean, we're not talking about lighting your farts. We're talking about breathing through your asshole and calling your rectum your lungs.
Your lungs. Oh, or maybe a diaphragm in that case.
This cannot stand, Will. The banks are doing things that just can't sustain themselves. Mm-hmm. And if the bank needs negative interest rates, then could that be to sustain their bond carry trade? Mm-hmm. Does that mean that they'll be shorting on the negative interest rate side? Receiving money? Oh, it gets kind of weird when you talk about the spread. What is the spread between what and what? Is the lower end negative suddenly on the spread? I don't know.
Up and down.
Gets very messy.
Yeah.
But it cannot sustain itself. And by that I mean it's not going to last long. Mm-hmm. In other words, the banks are going to fail. And they're talking about this precisely at a time when the oil hedges are coming off. By that I mean you're having expiration of big oil hedge contracts for the big energy firms. And Standard & Poor this week, announced a downgrade of 10 major U.S.-based oil companies.
Wow.
So we're going to be seeing some energy companies fail. Mm-hmm. They will not fail alone. Mm-hmm. They will fail with their favorite banks.
A little bit of, can we say, leverage?
Well, there's an old saying that when a bank has a giant lending partner, it really is a commercial partner and not a client. Mm-hmm. They go down together. They make money together or they go down together. Mm-hmm. I think we're at a critical point with these banks where the banks say to their client, we've been lending you money to make your debt service payments for the last 4 or 5 months, and we're not going to do it anymore because we don't see you getting out of this. We're going to limit how much we will default on.
Mm-hmm. Cut the losses.
Pardon me?
Cut the losses.
Cut the losses. Minimize the losses. Not add to the losses. Mm-hmm. Not compound the losses. Because all those bridge loans to make the debt service payments, they'll never see that money again. Right. And the banks are realizing that now as the hedges are coming off. I've explained what that means, the hedges coming off. Quickly, it means that a company like, say, Baker Hughes, that once was selling oil at $90 a barrel and was making money off that, they would sell forward on $95 per barrel. And they put out 18 months into the future contracts that they would not risk like in a casino, but put out there on the table and deliver into. Mm-hmm. So their output for the next 18 months was paid in advance by these contracts. So they locked in on the future, that $90 or $95 oil price. Okay, those are expiring now. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys, I call him George of the Comex in my gang, he's all over that. He said back in November and December, Jim, they're going to expire in January, February, and March. Well, we're in January, and poof, there's the S&P downgrade of 10 U.S.-based big energy companies. And in the article, they mention expiring oil hedges. Mm-hmm. So I try to be ahead of these things, and it's not my giant brain, it's my giant group. Sorry about that. I live near a boulevard.
That's okay, buddy.
Hey, Costa Ricans, they love to lay on a horn. It's so funny. You'd see 10 cars in a row, and they're not moving, but there's a taxi deep in the line, and he's just laying on his horn. I might walk by or ride by on my bike and say, Chaosis, what are you doing? And he just smiles and hits the horn again. Gives an ugly face.
Just making noise.
Anyway, that's the longhorn here. So, gosh, Will, we have so many moving parts now, and they're all ugly. They're all ugly. You got the big mining firms, they can't make any money. Mm-hmm. So they're making what they call they're shutting down a marginal mine, mothballing a mine. Mm-hmm. If you think these mines can come back, this is a point on the rising gold price. Mm-hmm. If you think a mine that has been shut down, just imagine you have 500 people working at a mine, a big hole in the ground with 7, 10, a dozen layers where the trucks climb. Mm-hmm. If you think that closed mine can come back in 30 or 60 days to be productive, you're dead wrong. I have a couple of clients who tell me about what had to be done in the Northwest Territory of Canada. Okay, they got the Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territories, and they both are big gold producers. Well, there's some Canadian laws that have to be complied with, and he told me they're spending a huge amount of money to seal the mines. I said, what kind of money are they spend? Well, like $1 billion to both take care of removal of the equipment and liquidating them, selling them for a loss, mm-hmm. and sealing the mine so they don't contaminate the nearby river.
Wow. And
I said to him, how long would it take to bring that mine in the Northwest Territories into productive mode? And he said, 1.5 years minimum. Wow. But you probably never see it unless we're way over 2,000 in the gold price. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's your indication. These mines cannot be reopened quickly in response to a rising gold price. First, because the mining companies will not conclude, well, we're above 2,000 and we're going to stay there. Mm-hmm. Second, they need to see it above and stably above, like for a year and a half above 2,000. And the second reason is just costs a lot of money to even open it, not produce, just to open it. Mm-hmm. These are environmentally messy. Mm-hmm. Oh boy. So when you see the gold price go over 2,000, I mean, I tell people, wake me up when we're over 1,350. Because they say, Jim, we're approaching 1,200. And I say, I couldn't give a shit. Wake me up when we're over 1,350. Because you're going to start to see some mines that are not sealed shut. You're going to see some of them that are marginally and just, in mothballs, not sealed shut. They're going to come back. They're going to come back quickly, like in a month or two. They've got to hire the people. That's not a simple, quick process that takes a week either. Mm-hmm. They got to get the manpower. They got to move the equipment in. Mm-hmm. They got to put it in place in the mine. This is open pit versus shafted tunnel system. There are all kinds of different mines that are at work. Okay, when you see the price of gold get up towards, say, 1,700, you're going to see some mines reopen. It's just not going to be enough to meet demand. So there's going to be a time lag for the supply to catch up. Mm-hmm. That's how you get to 5,000. Mm-hmm. Struggling to get to equilibrium. You're going to have to pry loose some of the gold holdings from people who are waiting for the 2,000 price. Mm-hmm. They're not going to sell everything they have. They're going to sell a portion. And they're going to wait. And they're going to say, well, it's 2,100 now, but maybe I can get 2,250. I'm holding out for 2,250. It didn't happen. They sold, say, 10% of what they've got. And they're hanging on to the majority. Mm-hmm. This is how the price just really takes off in the future months. And if you're looking for triggers, look no further than the Chinese. They're doing two things. They're taking control of the London gold fix. It's going to be called the Shanghai gold fix. And they're also going to be offering, it's already starting, the Shanghai gold futures contract priced in the RMB currency. Mm-hmm. They're going to be taking control. They're not in a hurry like you are. Right. They're Chinese. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make them dumb. It makes them patient. Yep. We're a very impatient Western society. There's a joke about Westerners. They check their portfolio every hour. The Chinese don't. They make a plan for taking control of the gold industry. And they've got the biggest producing output of any country in the world right now. Mm-hmm. I'd like to mention one little funny fact that The Voice cited a few months ago. I asked a question. I don't always ask really smart questions, Will. I may sound like I've got a lot of answers, but here's one question that I asked her. I don't mind exposing my ignorance at times because I don't have it all down. I asked over a year ago, why on earth is South Africa in the BRICS? They don't offer anything. What do they have? Good rugby team? Dancing Zulus? I don't know. What do they offer?
Gold, right?
Gold. The Voice said, Jim, it's a lot more than the gold mines. And that was his initial answer. I said, well, a lot more than the gold mine. Okay, so the Chinese eventually want to control the traffic or the operations of the South African gold mine. And then I got flack coming back from the 8 or 10 South African clients that I have, Union of South Africa. And they said, no, the Chinese will never own our big, giant gold mining companies. And I said, okay, fine. They'll just control the output. Yeah. They'll be buying all the output. And that could be. But then several months ago, The Voice made a comment. He said, Jim, in keeping with your query from several months ago about South Africa, China wants the South African output from their mines, to be sure. And they'll come back online, and maybe they're deeper, and maybe they're narrower, and maybe they're lower yield nowadays. But don't worry. The South African mine output will return. But, Jim, there's something you need to be aware of. It's called the Rand Refinery.
Mm.
Now, I did some checking several years ago. I think it was around '07. Did you know that the South African language for a mountain ridge, R-I-D-G-E, is Rand? So they named their currency after the mountain ridges that produces the gold.
Mm-hmm.
So the mountain ridge is their Rand.
Mm-hmm.
So the Rand Refinery, the voice said, he said, Jim, an anomaly has come. You should alert your clients in the Hetrick letter. He does that often. And I do. And it's good information to include. He said the Rand Refinery has tripled its output of refined bars of gold in the last 4 or 5 years, during which time the South African mines are down 65 or more % in output.
Wow, where's the gold coming from? So the Congo. So the Chinese are taking Congo gold and refining it using the fantastic refining capabilities of South Africa.
Right, and buying them in Dubai.
Interesting.
So you got a Congo, South Africa, Dubai, Shanghai connection.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I went further, and he made a comment. You know, he loves to just throw something on the table, and we go, wow. Okay, here was his comment. He said, take a look at this map. And it was Congo and its landmass, including all of Western Europe. Just Congo. Now, I don't want to get into all the different names, you know, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I don't care what it's called. It's Congo, okay?
Right.
It's a mess. It was the Belgian Congo for a while, where the Belgians assassinated all the leaders in order to get the big mining contracts and get cheaper supply of a lot of metals.
Uh-huh.
Murder's good business. You don't haul on stage into court the British mining executives who ordered the murder of the Congolese ministers. There was a good movie. I just cannot remember who starred in the movie. It was about 2 years ago. It was an assassination in Congo, ordered by a London-based mining company. Assassination of the mining minister in Congo in order to get a more favorable contract. And they did. I can't remember who starred in it. I'll find out when I hang up. I'll do a little web search. But anyway, the point was Congo's landmass is gigantic. Africa's landmass is gigantic. If you just take sub-Saharan Africa, it's gigantic. So I started to make a query with the voice. It's not just, they call it the distressed zone of Africa, the distressed nations. Mm-hmm. That's Congo and the others, Congo et al. So I started wondering, who are the other countries? Well, it's Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and a couple of others. It's about 5 countries. They're all good size. Mm-hmm. And one thing that the voice will not answer is, what's the output in tonnage per year from, say, 5 countries in the southern part of Africa? Mm-hmm. All I hear is, well, Congo might be around 1,000 tons a year. Compare that with China. What are they, 250? So Congo's 4 times China, and we call China the leading producer in the world? Congo's 4 times China, the leading producer in the world?
Interesting.
In other words, China's not the leading producer in the world. And you can probably get 3 different African countries that are all bigger than China, and China's buying their output.
Wow. The movie,
it's going through the Rand Refinery.
Interesting. The movie is The Gunman with Sean Penn.
Sean Penn was a gunman. Yes, yes.
The gunman, a sniper on a mercenary assassination team, kills the Minister of Mines of the Congo.
Do they put a year in there? I got the impression it was like the 80s or 90s.
Well, this one is 2015 now.
No. I mean the
sorry.
timing of the movie itself.
Not in this little summary I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thanks for that. It fortifies my message. Okay. Why did they have a movie about assassination of Congo mining ministers?
Right.
Because there's something going on, Will.
Mm-hmm.
Take a look at the nature of some movies, not all. I mean, forget the Zero Dark 30 from 2 years ago about the mythical bullshit of killing Osama bin Laden. Total bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
There are movies out now that are like exposés.
Mm-hmm. What was the one I saw the other day? It was in X-Files. I saw it up on SGT. I think he had something about the X-Files, new season in the first episode, I guess, was like off the charts. I mean, just incredibly symbolic with what it was.
Yeah, I'm a little bothered by the X-Files that came out. Did they fail to include anything in that? No, what they did was a blitz. They had 15 different factors in there.
Mm-hmm.
Just they wanted to blow your mind.
Right.
It wasn't an exposure.
Right.
It was a blitz to knock you flat.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't include that in the same category as the Sean Penn movie. Sean Penn will not be in a movie unless it's a lot of fun or it has a real message.
Huh.
He's just a real maverick. He turned down an Oscar for his movie about the Mystic, Massachusetts kidnapping. Mystic, Connecticut. Anyway, it was about kidnapping in New England.
Uh-huh.
He and Timothy Robbins were in the movie, and he got an Oscar, and he didn't want it. So that's kind of like what, the guy who played Patton, what was the name of him? His son is named Campbell. Anyway, whatever. So a lot of moving parts, Will. I'm rambling here, but I'm trying to make some good points. We're at a point now where a lot of exposures are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just going to be Putin and the Kremlin with 9/11 exposures. It's going to be a whole lot more. It's going to be very embarrassing stuff for people like the Clintons, the Bushes, the Rothschilds. Like the people who did 9/11.
Couldn't happen to a nicer group.
Yeah, well, I heard from The Voice a very strange claim. I don't doubt it. When I say claim, I don't mean to impugn him in any way or to make it sound like, well, it was kind of cockeyed. No, he made a claim. These are things that are next to impossible to verify. But he said, this was back in the middle of 2015, he said 90% of the players within the banker cartel, the banker cabal, 90% of them have signed the accord, the agreement with the White Dragons and the powers in the East to stop the destruction of the earth, to stop the gigantic trillion-dollar bond frauds, and to stop the killer vaccines. And it wasn't long after that the Ebola stopped. Ebola is a killer vaccine designed to kill for any idiot who's willing to take the vaccine. I warned a family. I was close to a woman in 2008. I warned her aunts. I told her, all your kids, refuse the swine flu vaccine. But Jim, you don't understand. It's recommended by the schools. I said, refuse. Is it mandatory? No. I said, then refuse. You'll know why in 2 or 3 years. And my gal had to convince him, Jim knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Which is difficult because I only knew her for 2 years. And the mothers and aunts, they didn't know me much. Mm-hmm. All they knew was that I took their little kids to a movie and let them climb on my back. You know, a little 8-year-old, 9-year-old climbing on my back and, you know, hanging on me. Four kids hanging on the jackass as I'm walking. It's a funny sight. But here's what I'm leading to. Only one little girl took the vaccine, and she has a mysterious brain disease. I told my gal to tell that other aunt who lives 40 miles from San Jose and just didn't get the word, tell her that it's probably the Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's very conveniently put in with the other poisons in the swine flu vaccine. But Jim, it's a vaccine. It's supposed to prevent. I said, no, it's a vaccine that is laced with poison to infect.
Yep.
For people who were too dumb and trusting to suspect that the authorities would want to kill them. Well, so the little girl, I did a check, a follow-up a year later. I said, how's the little girl out in San Ramon doing? Well, she's been out of school for 5 years, and she'll never have a normal life. Mm-hmm. She's now about 16, and she drools down the side of her mouth and is out of school. Okay, this is what you get for taking the vaccines, people!
Yeah, this is a really, you know, I mean, I have young children. This one is really a difficult one for me, and it's been a cause of much debate over the last several years with, you know, friends and family and everything else. It's the current fraud that is the vaccine industry is so unbelievably powerful and potent. I mean, the fact that it has bought and paid for and propagandized an entire medical industry. I mean, you have doctors who actually believe this shit, that a child under the age of 24 months, I mean, do you know what the current vaccine schedules are, Jim? They are criminal. I mean, when I was a kid, I maybe had 10 or a dozen vaccines before, you know, total. Now the schedule is, it's like 50 or 60 by the time they're 18 months old, and it's another 20 on top of that by the time they're 24 months. And I might be off a little bit, but it's absurd. It's like, it's absurd. I have a client, actually, who this came up in conversation recently, and she said, well, you might be surprised to learn that I'm actually vaccine damaged. She was at her getting a checkup with her doctor, you know, several years ago, and the doctor said, well, have you had your, you know, have you had your vaccine? And she said, no, what are you talking about? I'm a healthy adult. Why do I need a vaccine? You know, people aren't dying of polio. What are you talking about? Well, he talked her into getting a DTaP, which is one of those 3-in-1 vaccines. Anyway, she developed days later, you know, about malfunction in her neck, you know, neurological breakdown in her neck, and she has to get, you know, Botox injections. And anyway, it's so unbelievable. I mean, it's sickeningly unbelievable.
I have two stories, Will, to go with yours. One has to do with Africa. In Ghana, Sierra Leone, there's a giant laboratory owned by Soros and Bill Gates of Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And it was to develop more and more of these laced Ebola vaccines. Yep. By laced, I mean contaminated. They're not to prevent, they are to infect.
Right.
The laced Ebola vaccines. And what they found, they had to shut down some of their operations because the natives were murdering the Red Cross workers. Mm-hmm. After they noticed that the only sick people were those who were vaccinated.
Yep.
They're murdering the Red Cross.
Wow.
In Western Africa. And it wasn't one country. It was 3. Ghana, Sierra Leone, and one other I cannot remember. I think it might have been Niger, or I don't know. Okay, the other story I have is that it's the murder of the holistic doctors in the southern U.S.
Yeah.
They discovered a cure for cancer, including advanced cancer. Mm-hmm. It was to give a jet assist to the macrophage. That's MicroPhage production. Macrophages are kind of like super antibodies. And if you're really sick, your macrophages will come in and attack the external agent and kill it.
Right.
If you have cancer, the same macrophages will attack the cancerous region and render it healthy in much the same way it attacks viruses and bacteria. That was one thing they learned. But they also learned that the vaccines were laced with inhibitors of your macrophage production. And 8 or 10 of them were murdered.
Yep. This was all within a 6-month time frame or something too. I mean, there were.
It was last August and September.
Yeah.
8 of them were found dead, and the police, in one case, found a Georgia doctor with a shotgun wound in his chest, lying face down, and they called it suicide without any investigation. What did these 10 or 12 doctors have in common? 2 things. They're all working and publishing on the results of how vaccines are laced.
Yep.
Not with the poisons, not with the infections, but also, not just, but also with inhibitors to your immune system. In other words, to make you a good pharmaceutical company customer.
Yeah.
But they also had something else in common. One day before their murder or disappearance, they all had a visit from the FBI.
Really?
Now, here's how I got very emotionally wrapped up in this. I've had a debate with my own father for a 2-year period that the U.S. cancer industry is a profit center, not a cure center. They ban cures. They ban good, successful treatment. They keep going the constant treatment all the way to your extended death.
Yep.
It's very profitable, and it's about $70,000 for a treatment per year. And here's where it gets ugly, uglier than what it's already been. $70,000 in treatment. How much do you think it costs Big Pharma to produce the post-chemotherapy treatments? $7,000. I need notes in front of me here. I'm all going extemporaneous here. $70,000 for treatment. It costs them $70 to make the drugs.
Wow.
It's a 1,000-fold markup. Now, when I lost a job in 1993, I actually interviewed with AstraZeneca for a job as a clinical trial statistician. And in the course of the interview, I asked them, what's the profit margin on your drugs? And they said, well, some of it's a well-kept secret, but we will tell you in general that, most of American industry has like a 25 or 30% profit margin, but we have about an 80% profit margin because we must fund our research.
Yeah.
There's a lot more research involved in pharmaceutical production than there is in selling garden equipment or tools at Home Depot.
And they propagandize,
okay.
and they propagandize that all the way into, I remember learning that specifically in economics in some form of study,
Well, okay, here's my point. My point, though, is AstraZeneca admitted that they had an 80% profit margin.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means 8 parts profit, 2 part cost, 4 to 1. The example I gave of the cancer treatment was 1,000 to 1.
Right.
They don't want you to be cured. And I put that in my September Hattrick letter report. And I did not expect the response that I got. Jim, I am a professional in something field that's not medical, but I was working with all their data systems at the John Wayne Cancer Institute in Southern California. And one day I was dealing with a problem with, lost data, and we recovered it, But in the course of going into the oncologist's office, I noticed that there were a series of photos on his wall. And I said to the doctor, "That looks like skin cancer. What does this mean? W1, W2, W3. I see by W7 that it's almost all cleared up." He said, "Those are weeks." "Oh, you mean there's a cancer cure for skin cancer that does the job in 7 weeks?" And he said, "Yes." "Well, then why are we doing Dr. Vax's protocol for cancer treatment over several months without a cure?" And the Japanese doctor working at the John Wayne Cancer Institute in Southern California smiled at this client of mine and said, "You haven't been around long enough. There's no money in cancer cure. There's only money to be gained in cancer treatment. This is for one of our staff members."
Wow.
And the guy said, 1 month later, the Japanese guy left the United States disgusted. There's no permitted cancer cures in the United States. I know a guy who knows 2 doctors who've had their offices burned down. He also knows somebody who had a patient who died, and the government of the United States charged him with murder just so he'd stop doing the cancer cures. And I've asked around, what are some of the common pieces to cancer cure that are, not real hush-hush? And he said, "Jim, it's easy. You eliminate all carbohydrates from your diet. Eliminate tea and your sugar and coffee. Stop eating bread. Don't eat crackers. Don't eat pasta, linguine, spaghetti. Don't eat rice, any kind of rice. Don't eat carbohydrates." And I said, "Well, how are you going to get your energy supply?" And he said, "Don't worry about it. You'll burn your fat, you'll lose a little weight, and you'll always get a little bit of carbohydrates, like in natural juices."
Right. Fruit. Yeah.
Vegetables, you'll get some carbohydrates.
Well, I've always heard that an alkaline environment, that cancer cannot exist. So one cancer, at home cancer remedy is rid your body of all acidity and just eat kale and high alkaline foods like crazy.
Like raisins, too. I eat raisins.
Yeah?
I eat them almost every day.
My kid loves raisins.
I eat a bowl of oatmeal with milk, honey, and raisins, and I don't heat it up.
Yeah, I told you, I quit. I never liked the microwave. It always kind of freaked me out, so I never was a big fan and didn't use it much. But a couple of years ago, you got me off of the microwave. I mean, I haven't used a microwave in a couple of years.
I stopped in January of 15. I wish I'd stopped earlier, but I really didn't use it much. I used it some. Now it's sitting in a closet with old socks on it.
Yeah. I was just mounted into the wall, so there's not much.
I had a hard time, Will, knowing that if it blew up some aluminum foil, what's it doing at the molecular level?
Right.
I mean, I just make simple comparisons like that. But
if it's causing...
I learned from one of my clients, it's a fellow PhD at Carnegie Mellon. He's visited me twice. He's a really nice guy. I don't want to give away his identity, but he's a real smart guy. He's not in the statistics field. He's in a scientific engineering field. And he visited me on the second time. He visited and said, "Jim, what do you know about water?" And I said, "Well, it's a staple of life. You can't have it without it. You can't have life without it." And I think that, and I made a joke. I said, "I think extraterrestrials are here because we've got a lot of water on planet Earth." And he said, "Well, that could very well be. But are you aware that no two bodies of water are alike?" And I said, "No, tell me more." And he said, water can be disorganized. Water cannot be in its proper lattice structured system. And I said, well, that's interesting. And he said, yeah, if you drink good water, you will have a healthier body and healthier internal metabolic processes. And he went on to say some other things that are a little bit unusual, but he told me this, that there have been some experiments recently on water. Microwave your water, heat it up, cool it off, and feed your plants that water. It kills all your plants in 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you remember if you have to microwave it, do you have to heat it to the point of boiling? Because I've also read something that water, once you've boiled it, like if you use a tea kettle and you make tea, once water's been boiled, don't reboil it. In other words, dump it out, and put fresh water in to boil a new batch. Because once it's been boiled, there's something that, that takes place.
I think it loses its lattice structure.
Mm-hmm.
And he went on to say, Jim, you need to study water more, and you might want to study salts more.
Mm-hmm.
And just coincidentally, a month later, a fellow who lives in suburban San Jose who's not a client said, Jim, I'd like to meet with you. I got a business, and I'm well-read in certain areas, and let me just take you out for lunch. Mm-hmm. So I let him buy me lasagna with chicken at a little restaurant, and he gave me a bottle of pink salts.
Good stuff.
From
Himalaya.
The Himalayas.
Yeah.
And now I find that my gal steals it. She said, Jim, I want more of that. I take it once in a while. I don't take it enough. I'm the kind of guy who does some of the things I know are good, but I just don't do them enough.
Yeah.
So I'm going to age just from not doing it enough. But I take some other things like DHEA, and I had a wonderful thing happen to me just a few weeks ago. During Christmas, some woman was helping me to buy a shirt as a present, and a woman's shirt. And we just got talking a little bit, and it wasn't a flirting incident, but she was just a nice woman, and she was bored because there was almost nobody in the store, between Christmas and New Year's. And she said, who's this for? And I said, well, it's for a woman I know. And I joke, I say, it's for my mother. And they say, well, wait a minute, how old's your mother? I say, well, my mother's actually dead. She's gone. No, this is for a woman I know. And then they say, how long you been in Costa Rica? I say, 9 years. And how old is your girlfriend? I say, oh, she's about 30. Oh, well, that's nice. What are you, about 50? And I say, well, how old do you think I am? No, really, just no games. Don't flatter me or anything. This is all in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
How old do you think I am? So she looks at me, and I make sure that she sees my dome without a whole lot of hair on it. And she said, 52.